Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Modern Web Podcast. My name is Tracy. You can follow me on Twitter at Lady Leet, and I have two really awesome guests today. We have Nate Hunziker and we have Philip Spies, and they're going to be joining us to talk about what's new and exciting in React. So first off, let me go ahead and introduce Nate. Nate is a development director at Vigit, and he also works on a lot of JavaScript and Android applications. You can follow Nate on Twitter at @nhunzaker. That's H-N as in Nancy, or N as in Nate, actually. HUNZAKER. And then we also have Philip Spies, and he is the lead developer at PSPDF Kit and creator of a newsletter that you all probably have heard of before, which is This Week in React. So thanks, everybody, and thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thank you.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yes. So there has been a ton of movement in React. I think we're all used to that being in the JavaScript ecosystem. There's always something new happening, always a rewrite happening, always something magical.
Yeah.
But, Hooks has been on our mind for a few months now. Maybe you guys can just explain what Hooks is for people who haven't heard of it before.
Yeah, so hooks are a new feature in React. They were announced at ReactConf 2018, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Philippe, but I think they've only been around for about a month now in the wild.
Yeah, not much longer.
Yeah, and they provide an alternate way to describe components using more of a functional style. And overall, like using them on projects, I found that they make writing components to be much more concise and clear. And there's some things around them to improve composition that both make hooks really easy to reuse across projects and components, and also very easy to think about. I think there's some confusion around some finer points of the API and hooks, and the React team has really been busy clarifying things on the issue boards and through Twitter and other social media channels. But overall, to me, they represent a really great way to move forward writing components in a very concise, clear way. Philippe, would you have anything to add there?
No, not really. I mean, for me, when I first read through the official documentations, I was a little bit confused. But then there was this example of how you can combine hooks to create your own custom hooks. And that was just completely blow my mind. You can just, if you compare it to the previous version where you have class components, you would have code scattered around between the different life cycles. You would have component did mount, you register something, and then on component did unmount, you would clean it up again. And with hooks, this is just in one line. You can do it with the same function, basically, in this case, the use effect hook. And seeing how this can be composed together is just mind-blowing.
Yeah, there have been a handful of times internally at Vigit where I've seen pull requests that use hooks. And it's really awesome to see the kinds of changes that are happening with them. We're starting to see there's kind of like a hooks layer in some cases where people can operate on and make state changes faster or better or more concise or clear. And it's awesome to see that that's not necessarily happening just in components. So I think seeing pull requests come in, I'd see changes where a whole bunch of state management code was inside of a bunch of lifecycle methods, or there was like a refactor to pull all that out of lifecycle methods into something else. And I'm not seeing that with hooks. And it's been really great to see sort of this hooks layer emerge on our React apps. And I'm really excited to figure out what that means and see sort of the abstractions around that start to build up over time in the community.
There's a cool project I want to quickly point out here. It's called usehooks.com from Gabe Ragland, where Gabe basically makes a few of those custom hooks to show off how they work. And it's really cool, just looking over it, seeing what can be built with hooks. It's really awesome.
Yeah, that's a really amazing website too, usehooks.com.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I mean, would you say that people should start refactoring their applications to use hooks now?
Oh, that's a really difficult question to answer. I mean, rewriting code is rewriting code, right? Like doing a refactor to hooks. If you don't have a like a really compelling reason to do it is like rewriting code just to make it look nicer. And there could be good things about that, especially if you're using hooks in other parts of your application and you want to sort of reconcile the differences between the two. That can be a really good reason to consider reworking some components.
Does it increase any level of performance because of the less use of code at all, or anything internally?
That's a good question. There are some hooks is the wrong word for it. There are some parts of the API that enable memoization, especially for things like use effect. Use effect is a hook that sort of describes the life cycle of a React component, like the React did mount, React component did update, component will unmount. It does that in a really concise way, but it's like describing a function inside of a function. And that can get called every time if you're not careful with sort of what you're doing with the API. But by adding like a second argument to the hook to provide sort of dependencies to control when it should update or when it should change, you can, I think, more elegantly do some code to prevent things from happening more than they need to. Whereas before, like in a React, in some of the React component lifecycle methods, you'd have to like check prior state and compare it to new state. And sort of that was cumbersome enough that I think it made it less desirable to add performance countermeasures, I guess, or optimizations, I should say, up front. But it's sort of, I think, part of the API of hooks lends itself better to memoization and preventing duplicate work. So anecdotally, I'm curious to see what the overall performance implication is on a large project. And I'm really curious to see what things like how adding things like memoization and other things to even just like very small use cases sort of builds up over time to making faster applications.
That's interesting. So it sounds like that the React team is not really saying, hey, this is, you know, for all the lovely upgrades we do on versioning, this is not like a, hey, you should really be refactoring your application to use hooks as you're upgrading to React, you know, X.X or anything like that. It's kind of more of like a nice to have, or is this now the recommended way to do it? And then my second question would be, have we seen instructors, maybe like Michael Jackson from React Training, for example, start to update their trainings to teach people hooks as they're learning React?
So I guess for the first question, hooks is definitely something that is optional at the moment. It's also in the official documentation. It's not on the web and on the landing page yet. It's a different section. That is because all of the projects out there in React, they are full of class components, and they will keep using class components for the next few months and even years. Also, if you see like how Facebook is handling the situation, they have a couple of thousand components, and most of them are class components, and they also will keep supporting them. So I don't think it's like the recommended approach to rewrite anything at the moment. But I think the core team encourages people to take a look at hooks if they like have some time for that, play around with it, and maybe start it for new things. I think that's like a good way to introducing it. And then at some point, yeah, maybe you can work more on it. And if you're like really comfortable with this pattern, you can, when you refactor a component, maybe rewrite it with hooks. And regarding the instructors, I actually don't know for sure, but I have seen lots of resources online for hooks. I also know that the React core team did experiments with the new documentation, especially with people that have started learning React. And it seems like hooks are easy to get into, even easier than class components, or maybe on the same level, because you don't have to learn about this in JavaScript, which we all know can be quite confusing at some point. So yeah, I think we will see more and more of that as well. I would definitely, like, if I learn React now, I would still, like, there's no way to don't learn class components.
Yeah, and I think learning class components is really important to understand sort of what hooks are doing for particular things like use effect. The hooks API is very much like a JavaScript API versus the class component API, which is like more of an invented API. Like it has like names given to things. It has lifecycle method names like component did update and stuff like that. So I think it's important to know that stuff so that as you're using hooks, you know, really kind of what is the mapping of this, of the new hooks API to what existed prior. But it's been curious to see too. I saw some discussion on Twitter about whether hooks were easier to learn than the class API. And it sounds like it's still up for debate on Twitter, especially for people that have used the class component API for years. I think that they have different things to say. So I'll be really curious to see, especially from people doing training, what they find as they're teaching people hooks for the first time. And that's sort of their entryway into how React works.
That's really interesting. It's kind of like, you know, a few years ago, at least I remember when I was learning JavaScript and I was already using ES modules, and a lot of, you know, that was what I learned, right? Like that was standard de facto. That's how you do it. And I was talking to some of my friends who have been, you know, more involved in the JavaScript universe, had been developing for many years. And they were still kind of like, oh, this is not something we really use. So it's really curious as new people are entering the JavaScript ecosystem, you know, things like async await and things like that, or hooks, all of a sudden these are becoming the standard de facto. And, you know, new developers are kind of understanding these newer technologies even quicker and adopting them even quicker than developers who have been developing for many years. I find that quite intriguing.
Yeah, I think that happens often with like a mind shift from a mental model, and the hooks mental model is quite different from class components. So if you like already learned some of them, like the class way, it might not be as intuitive as if you start like with a fresh mind, with like a blank page.
Yeah, it's a great reminder too, especially for those of us that have been in the community for a while, that older things aren't necessarily easier to learn because they've been around for a while. And I'm reminded of working with people that have never used promises before, and sort of picking up asynchronous code in JavaScript. Like chaining then callbacks doesn't make any sense, but like saying this is an asynchronous function and I want to await for this to happen, and if it fails, it throws an error just like regular JavaScript and stuff like that. That ends up being much clearer to them. In a way where like I was sort of hesitant to just start using async await on a project, and but they didn't have sort of the baggage or the background to say like, no, I should use promises instead, because that's what I understand. So I'm really excited to see it, and I think the same thing is going to be true for hooks too. So I'm really excited to see what people do with hooks next.
Cool. Well, definitely check out hooks. You can go to usehooks.com, as Nate and Philip have mentioned. And Michael Jackson actually on this .javascript state of frameworks and libraries gave a really good update on what's coming up and talked a little bit about hooks and everything. So you can check that out as well. But next up, what else is going on in the React world?
So there's an interesting property about hooks. There's this new thing called useEffect. And compared to previous ways in React, it would run a function and get an effect after the next render. So when you're testing your code, and you would like have in Jest or whatever your JavaScript test runner is, you would just render this component. You would realize that when you make assertions, this effect wasn't run yet. So to solve this, a new helper was introduced. It's called Act, and I think it's still quite new, and like we're still adopting at this as a community. The general idea is that you wrap everything that kind of updates your React tree, for example, your React DOM.render calls, you're wrapping this around an act function, and then React can make sure that all of the effects are flushed, or like all of the effects are triggered before you can make your test assertions. And it has been really confusing a bit, like this act synchronous API, and that's why I'm super excited that this week the await act syntax was merged, so that allows you to basically wrap the callback, the act callback in an async function, and you could do like async callbacks in there as well. And React will still make sure that all of the effects are flushed. So that's really cool. I think we're gonna see some documentation about this in the next few weeks, as we are like this has already only been merged this week. There's an alpha release out at the moment. It will be part of the next minor release, but that's really cool.
Yeah, I think documentation is the big key thing and community awareness. Act really snuck past me in a way. Sort of, I had a project and I was working on it, and just using like Enzyme with React 16, and I wasn't using hooks yet or anything. And sort of the pain point wasn't clear to me. So I think APIs like Act that do like solve very real problems for people, even if that problem isn't necessarily visible to every developer. It'll be really important in documentation and in sort of community awareness to talk about the value of those things and why you should use them, and sort of what purpose they have in the API. And I guess that brings us to another point too, which I think is super cool, which is that Rachel Neighbors is joining the React core team to work on docs, demos, and tending to the community. And I'm really excited about this. I know Rachel Neighbors personally. We used to work with each other a few years ago. And she's an awesome person. Yeah, she's just the best. Yeah. So I'm really excited to see where she takes the React project. And I think she's in a really awesome
happy. Position. Yeah, because this is also very interesting, because this is kind of the first time that, well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that this is the first time that React has actually said, hey, let's hire somebody to actually focus on community, to focus on, I mean, I think they've done stuff with docs before, but the fact that she's going to be able to help facilitate some community stuff is amazing.
Yeah, I know like a lot of that has fallen on Dan and the rest of the core team to sort of make sure to clarify things, especially around some confusing things like the state of the scheduler and concurrent React and some other stuff. So having someone that can focus just on that, I think is going to be really great, and will be a way for the community to continue to grow even more than it already has.
She's the best, and you can actually follow her on Twitter at Rachel Neighbors. That's Rachel Nabors. She's awesome, and I'm sure she'll be super happy to see you guys pop up, especially if you have any questions. Well, actually, I don't know if has she started yet.
I don't know. She's tweeted about it, so
yeah.
I don't know when she starts actually.
I think she starts in May. Like there's one more month.
Okay, well, you can start tweeting her now and asking her questions about, questions if you have questions about React. I'm sure she'd be happy to answer them or redirect. Well, I mean, next up, should we talk about the new code splitting stuff in React, like the React Lazy and React Suspense? You guys want to get in there?
Yeah, so React.lazy is a API for accommodating lazy loading of components. What I found personally is that code splitting is really like the single most important thing that you can do for a JavaScript application in terms of performance. There's like targeted things that you can do, but just serving less code to a user and controlling how much code you roll out to a user, that's particularly valuable on a really large application where you might have like we work on a lot of content management systems, and we use React to build those tools. So lazy loading like a rich text editor is really important, because it means that we're not potentially pulling in like 200 kilobytes or 3 or more of JavaScript on every page just to do nothing with it. So I think it's super exciting to see it baked into React, and I know that sort of the plan for it is to fit things like React Lazy into other features like React Suspense, so that you can sort of like lazy load a feature and it'll bake into the same APIs as like the suspense placeholders and other loading state stuff for React. Philip, do you have anything to add there?
Not really. I didn't really had a chance to use it yet, but I'm super excited. I'm looking forward to it. It works like with the current approach of code splitting. There's this I think it's called import, this keyword that returns a promise, and it will load a module on demand, and then like when the module is loaded, the promise will resolve, and you can just like wrap your import with a React Lazy and then use it as a regular React component. So really exciting API.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I know some, with all the new features, right? A lot of people are just kind of thinking, okay, when do I start this? When do I start that? And I think some people are actually waiting for React Suspense before they start learning React hooks. Any thoughts on that?
It doesn't help that React concurrent React is out there yet. So concurrent React just for those that don't know about it, is basically the thing that has been in our heads since, I think, the introduction of the React Fiber algorithm. So right now, whenever you trigger an update in React, whenever you trigger a state change, React will perform all of the operations synchronously. And with concurrent mode, and the React scheduler itself can pause, yield to the main thread, so you can do other stuff as well, like updating user interactions or animations, and then continue working on your React app. And that's a super huge mind shift, and that's probably also why the React core team is still working on thinking about how they communicate this, and also even getting it ready. And what this would allow, so if you haven't seen it, I think it's Dan Abramov had a presentation about this last year in JSConf Iceland, and he talks about no, I forgot the name of the feature. He talks about basically code loading in concurrent React, as well as time slicing there. And you should really check it out to see kind of the ultimate goal of React here. And yeah, I think having to wait for at least a way to properly load data doesn't really help a lot with hook adoption, because right now, when you have a class component, for example, and you would need to load some data, it would be at same level of how you do it with hooks. You would just at some point fetch the data from your backend. And with the new data loading API, I still haven't remembered the name, you would just be able to declare it as a dependency in your render function, which would completely revolutionize or restructure how we think about data loading, and that's super exciting.
Yeah, overall, I think what I found is that seeing the demos and seeing some of the talks that the core team has prepared, asynchronous stuff in UI programming, it's not just about data. It's not just about like pulling down information from an API. That also covers things like we mentioned before with code. We're not building applications for the desktop. We don't install a 50 megabyte app bundle. So you have to incrementally load content over time, and some of that content comes from your API, and some of that content comes from your application. And so for me, I think that's a really cool thing about the Suspense API, is that it it covers all of those use cases and provides an API to developers like me to handle the states in between the ideal states. So if you're loading in maybe a user's profile information, there's a lot of state there just to get to that point. You've got to pull in information from your API. You have to maybe, if you're doing any image processing locally to grayscale something or something like that, maybe you're pulling in a library for that in real time. And that takes time to get down from the internet. And especially on mobile phones, having a good experience to let a user know that everything's working fine. It's just we're not quite there yet. That's a really crucial thing for user experience. And so having primitives like this in React is really exciting for me.
Well, awesome. So what else is going on? I mean, there's just so much. We could go on and on forever. We could probably do a 4-hour conversation just on what is new in React.
So I'm going to bring up a new topic here, React Fire. And it's especially interesting for Nate and me because we're both in the React DOM team, and we work with the browser stuff a lot of times. And so React Fire is this idea of rewriting parts of the React DOM integration so that it requires less polyfills and is just more modern in terms of a DOM framework. So there are different parts involved. The one is probably one of the biggest parts is the event polyfill system. It should, right now there are polyfills, for example, for the on-input handler, and they work across a lot of different browsers, I think up down to IE9. And so making changes there is really hard because there's a lot of programs or a lot of applications that depend on the current behavior, even though it's sometimes a little, maybe not the same that the behavior you would expect, but it's something that people have started depending on over the years. So with React Fire, and there's no timeline yet or at all when this will launch, the idea is to have a breaking change and making some of those changes so that we can move React forward in kind of a DOM perspective. So that might mean like removing some of the event polyfills and drastically simplifying the event system. It also might mean, and that's something I think where Nate can talk more about, the input and change handware and stuff.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I think for those not familiar with the background of this, there are a lot of decisions that React has made. Just because React is a project that has been around for a long time. It's been used at Facebook for, I don't even know how long, but certainly around the IE7 and IE8 days, which were about around the time that I started getting into the project. And I was really impressed that React supported IE7 and IE8 at the time. That was, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. And those just aren't constraints that we have anymore. And a lot of React's design decisions are based around supporting a world that includes IE7 and IE8. So we see this with things like the on-change and on-input differences. So usually, like in the regular browser environment without React, on-input changes like as a user is inputting something into a text box. So as you're like typing into a text inbox, it's sending out an event every single time. Or if you, but that also covers other things too, like if you paste and some other stuff. So it's a much higher, I guess, fidelity input event for inputs versus on change, which fires like on blur. That's a problem for the idea of controlled inputs in React, where you're sort of like every time you make a text change to a text input or something, it fires an event. You set some sort of internal state in React, and that gets put into the input again. And then the basic idea there is sort of to move the state from being under the control of a form input to putting it into React. So sort of React is your single source of truth. Achieving that feature is like the biggest motivation around why on change is not standard in React. But we don't have to do that anymore. We have events like on input. So it's not necessary for React to sort of patch over differences in the browser. But there's a lot of code out there that depends on change working exactly the way that it's always worked for years in React. And so these sorts of things are API decisions that we just finally want to make for a version of React so that we can work closer to how the browser actually works. And in the process of doing that, trim up some code, maybe not polyfill things quite as much, and then, but also think critically about the way that we're doing things in React DOM so that we can lean out a lot of the pieces that maybe aren't necessary anymore and make some compromises on sort of the prior API decisions that we've made for the sake of moving forward with like a smaller React DOM implementation. So yeah, so the on change and on input event handler is one example of that. There are some other ones too. So I know one of the big things that we're talking about now is the lack of passive event support in React. So that's another thing that I don't know how much of that will be wrapped up in React Fire, but that's definitely something on the roadmap to figure out is sort of whenever the React event system was designed in the first place, there were just captured events and bubbled events in React. But there's a lot other stuff that there's a lot of other things that you can do with events now. So certainly one of the things that I'm interested to see is how does the API for events change, or how do we add additional things to it to support those new events? So that if you want to do something like a passive scroll event versus an unpassive scroll event, or wheel event or something like that, you can do that in React, and it's sort of baked into the API, and it's not something you have to add later.
And, I'm sure people have opinions, as we all have opinions about how things are implemented in JavaScript. So is there an issue that people can comment on or kind of see where this is happening? Are there meetings maybe they can join to chat about this?
I think the best place to start is probably Dan Abramov's post about the roadmap for React Fire. Beyond that, there's a handful of really interesting PRs that have come through by Dominic Ganaway, working through and sussing out some features with the event system.
Mm-hmm.
Just following along with that on the issue board is a real interesting way to keep up with that. And if you don't want to follow it day by day, Philippe has a really great weekly email where he sort of really does a good job of diving through all those changes and talks about them and gives them lip service. So it's definitely worth checking out.
I love that. So, Philip, it's kind of like the React gossip column, right? Some people follow Kim Kardashian, but you can follow what's happening in React and the latest news.
Yeah, it's amazing. A lot of people like it apparently. I don't know. I got into this in somehow kind of. I was subscribed to the React repository and was seeing all the stuff that is going on, and I thought, what could I do with all of this information? And I remember from other frameworks like from Ruby on Rails, there were these weekly newsletters that basically covered everything that was developed. And I don't think there's anything like this for React. So yeah, I made it. And I've been doing it, I think, for 24 weeks now.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for doing that. It's so much to contribute to the community, and your time is so precious. So I know everyone appreciates it. Anything else we want to talk about for React Fiber? React Fiber, Google Fiber, React Fire. Anyways, React Fire before we move on to the next topic.
Not really, no. I think
okay.
A lot of things is still in the air. Like the exact features will still be laid out, as well as a exact timeline. But yeah, the general idea, I think we conveyed that very well.
Love it. Awesome. So any dev tool updates?
Yeah, for sure. So Brian Vaughn is busy all the time making really awesome stuff for React. Just like following his Twitter feed, like if you just go to his account and see like the videos that he's recording and sending out, there's some really impressive stuff that he's working on for both profiling and troubleshooting, rendering in React and profiling React. Beyond that, there's been some new additions recently. There's a React Warn and a React Error API, and so these are functions that exist on the React namespace. So just reading through the pull request for it, sort of the motivation behind this is that library authors often want to like log out a warning or an error. React has a really good convention of trying to warn very liberally in development mode to make sure that you're using it correctly. And that's sort of set an expectation in the community around like what tools should do to help developers write good code. So React.warn and React.error are some new things that have landed. I think it looks like it landed 15 days ago, so I'm not really sure what the state of it is in React itself. But the basic idea of this is to provide better tools to tool authors to fit deeper into sort of the React tool chain and provide like a common answer for things like this. So I think it's pretty cool to see. Beyond that, Philippe, do you have anything to update on tooling?
Nothing comes to my mind at the moment.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I think the short of it is that the stuff that Brian's been working on is really awesome, and it's making it really, really great to work on React apps. I went to the Android community and loved sort of all the tooling that I got there. Whenever I came back, I was really, really excited to see all the new stuff that he had been working on, and in a pretty short time too.
Yeah, there's even like just remembered that Brian is working on a rewrite of the React DevTools itself to make it more performant. And like just following along with this progress is just incredible how much there is. I think I just saw some tweet the other day, like this week, that now it will that React DevTools can make screenshots of your app while it's like making changes, which is impressive.
Yeah, the tweet I think you're referring to, there's like he's like stepping through and you can like see like a screenshot timeline, just like if you like use the performance tab in the browser. It's like a very similar thing where you can step through and you can see like what's going on here. Like I see a spike. Like, all right, what's happening on the screen at that point in time? So it's very, very exciting.
Awesome. Yeah. So one thing that I love about, I think just in general, it's like we always have these conversations about documentation and improving documentation. And I know there's a big documentation localization effort happening in React. So are there any updates on that?
Well, that is, I think, the most impressive project of the year so far, because I think it was completely managed by the community. We have started working on 28 localizations. That's quite a lot, and all of that community managed. So 8 of those translations are out there and complete and ready. 6 others are like already out as well, but not 100% complete. And as I said, 28 are being worked on. So if you want to see the official React documentation in your language, go to the React website, hit the languages tab, and you can just start helping out. And I think this is really cool. So my native language, my first language is German. I've looked at the German translation repository, and I think the level of professionalism in this repository just completely blew my mind. With my skills, like with my non-technical German, I was not even able to follow along, and I think it's really cool. So if for people that need to start with React now and maybe are not fluent in English, this will be like a huge improvement. And speaking for myself, I have learned programming as well when I was not like very good in English yet. So that was just enabled definitely the career for me. And seeing this happening with React, I think, at least for me personally, I think it feels like the best thing that happens this year so far.
Okay, I have a big question for this one. So I'm on the RxJS core team, and I led the docs initiative. Okay, but one of the things that we've kept punting on is the localization efforts, and the reason is because, you know, and Angular is the same way. So the way Angular does it is, you know, they have docs, for example, in Chinese and a few other languages, but it's a completely separate. It's completely separate. So every time there is an update on the Angular docs, they have to go and update the Chinese docs, for example, right? And we haven't really figured out how does that work? So when there's an update on the docs, how do the languages get updated? So how do you know?
I think the way that the system is set up is that we have different repositories, like forks of the English language, and every fork is maintained by at least, I think, 2 people per language, probably more. So, and there's also like a bunch of script. I haven't really looked into much detail here, but I think whenever there's any change, like these forks would pull it from the English language and then translate it and update it, something along those lines. I haven't wrapped my head around that, but I think it's from the Vue ecosystem actually. So we have seen it there first, and seems to like scale and work for Vue.js. So I'm excited that it now works for React as well. And it's been, I think, only 1.5 months or like maybe 2 months since we have even started with that, and we have 8 languages already finished. That kind of shows us the power of the React ecosystem and the community as well.
Yes, that's actually that's amazing. I mean, we have, it's funny because we have the RxJS docs translated into Russian, but it's just sitting in a Google Doc somewhere, just waiting for us to figure out how on earth we're going to do this at scale. But I love that so much. I'll definitely be reaching out to y'all for figuring that out. I like the idea of maybe, you know, like if the docs are updated, some sort of script goes and pings another repo or, you know, something like that to make sure that everything stays in sync.
Yeah, I think all of the documentation effort was actually started or like at least coordinated by Ned Ellison. So I think she helped a lot with that, and it's incredible to see basically her work being pulled up like by so many different developers for all of the different localizations. It's really cool.
Yeah, you know, I think people really underestimate the impact that you can have. Right. I'm sure she was like, oh, I want to start this. And she's thinking, oh, it's going to take forever, you know, and then all of a sudden, you know, 1.5 months later, you have 8 languages done. And so, you know, for anybody who's pausing on thinking about, hey, you know, maybe I need to get involved, but I don't have time for this. With the RxJS docs, I don't have that much direct involvement right now, but all I needed to do was just set up a repo and be like, okay, here you go. Here's a blank Angular app, you know, just like create React app, right? And then the community kind of took itself on. So just that little spark of fire starting there is really helpful. Cool. Okay. Do you guys want to talk about one other topic? maybe we could talk about the maybe the concurrent mode / scheduler suspense stuff that's happening.
Yeah, so like there's a lot of stuff written in the air still because it's not released yet. It will probably be out there this year. I think I heard this from Dan Aberworth recently. I wrote a little blog post about this, scheduling in React, basically. The idea is that with concurrent mode, you have a lot of features that you can build on top of that. So not only like being able to pause during this like updating of your React application, it's not really helpful, but if you combine that with other features like scheduling, where you can then prioritize different parts of your user interfaces to others, enables like a whole different level of optimization that the framework can take over, which was previously done in user space and with different implementations and not really very well. So that's this example, I think, again, from quoting Dan Abramov's talk from last year at JSConf Iceland, where you have a text input, and while you type the text input, some charts underneath it, they were updated. So with a naive approach, with the current approach, React would do everything at the same time. So whenever you do a keystroke, it would not only update the input box, but would also render the charts in the same frame. So that, and as the charts gain more fidelity, it will slow down your system. So with the scheduler, basically, you could separate those two things. You could say, okay, the input box itself is more important for the user because they are looking at this probably right now. They are making a keystroke and they want to see an update on the screen in real time. And the rest of the website, the charts, they could render a little bit later. Like if it takes 50 milliseconds for those to finish, and you would still be able to see your keystroke 50 milliseconds earlier, that's a net win for the user interface. So I could recommend, if you're interested into this, by checking out my latest blog post. It's actually, I think, my first self-published blog post on my website. I have like the same examples there as well. I think gives you an idea of the possibilities of where we're going.
Yeah, it's a really fantastic post, and I think it's also worth checking out too some of the talks that were given at ReactConf as well. So Andrew Clark and Brian Vaughn gave a talk about concurrent React, and in addition to that too, Sophie and Dan gave some talks about hooks and some other parts of the upcoming at the time React API. Those are all really fantastic talks. They're super polished, and like you can tell they like really worked really hard to make them amazing talks. So they're worth checking out. I think they speak volumes to the features that are coming in React in a way that most people can understand. So they're definitely worth checking out.
Awesome. That's great. You know, I wanted to actually bring something up because this is an initiative that I've been working on. So we started this thing called Hire the Fempire. And for those of you listening out there, if you are open source maintainers of any libraries, specifically any UI libraries in React, definitely reach out to me and ping me because we're working with a company called Applitools to get more women in tech. And the way the program works is we as ThisDot actually provide mentorship to these women, and Applitools goes ahead and pays these women to do open source contributions. So I don't know if you guys remember when, Travis CI and Circle CI were trying to gain traction. They would just submit PRs to say, hey, look at how awesome your build is now. You obviously need Travis. Applitools it's providing free licenses for open source libraries. So, I mean, you can do this anyways. You don't need us if you don't want to. But if you do want to help out a woman in tech, you can just message me. Again, my Twitter is @LadyLeet. And we can, try to get an underrepresented minority to actually do the work, give them an opportunity, give them a mentor to try to get into the React ecosystem. And I think, I love that you two, for example, are part of the React DOM team. That's awesome. Great initiative, obviously. But, really, again, encouraging, don't underestimate the effort or the even small amount of effort that you can put in to really make a difference within the React ecosystem.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, definitely.
No, I love it. Yeah. And this was a really great conversation. This was a really amazing podcast, actually. I will be reaching out to you all because we have been holding off on doing React Contributor Days for quite some time. But sounds like Nate and Philip, I'm going to rope y'all in and we're going to get React Contributor Days going. So, yeah, stay tuned for React Contributor Days. We should definitely schedule it and figure that out very, very, very soon. Once again, my name is Tracy. You can follow me on Twitter at Lady Leet. And Nate, I actually gave I think I gave not your Twitter handle, but your Instagram handle.
Oh, well, that'll just be pictures of my dog. Let's see. My Twitter handle is at Nate Hunzaker. That's at Nate, Hunzaker, and that's on Twitter.
Yes. And Philip, you're so easy. It's just Philip Spies. So perfect on that one. And join us next time for the next oh my gosh, what am I even saying? Modern Web Podcast. I have too many events going on is quite honestly what is happening. Thank you again, everybody, for listening. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks for having us.